Hello and welcome back to our second video dealing with standard cost variance, looking at price variance and quantity variance. So what we have here is a general model of how we conduct variance analysis. These concepts are really important, and we're going to work with them as we go through and calculate price and quantity variance for material, labor, as well as variable manufacturing overhead. So if you notice, the first calculation is we need to calculate price variance. It's very easy for us to do, right? We take the standard price times the actual quantity, and we get our answer, right? We get a number. We subtract that from the actual quantity at the actual price, okay? So that's the difference between the price difference or the price variance. There's another way we could look at this. Notice the two equations, 1 and 2, right? What are we holding constant? Actual quantity. So we're actually multiplying actual quantity by the difference of actual price. Oh, sorry, I'm writing with a mouse here. It's not very easy. Standard price. So the calculation, you can do it one of two ways. You can actually multiply actual quantity times actual price, get a number, subtract that from the actual quantity at the standard price. You could do that. Or you could recognize factoring here and say, well, wait a minute, actual quantities held constant in both equations. I'm really just multiplying the actual quantity I use times the difference between the actual price and the standard price. That's how you get the price variance. Definitely need to know that. So I would jot that down, take notes on that, okay? How do we calculate the quantity variance? Very easy, right? We take equation 2 and subtract that from equation 3. Notice what the calculations are. The actual quantity at the standard price and the standard quantity at the standard price. So if we want to calculate quantity variance, we could do it one of two ways. We can actually say, okay, what's the actual quantity times the standard price, and then we could take the standard quantity times the standard price and subtract the difference. Or we could recognize here that, hey, between I'm just going to say equation for lack of a better term, 2 and 3 both hold standard price constant, right? So basically, to figure out the quantity variance, I'm going to use my standard price, and I'm going to multiply that by the difference of my actual quantity minus my standard quantity. And that's how you get quantity variance. To calculate spending variance, you just take the difference between, or you add up rather, price variance and quantity variance. Or you take equation 3, standard quantity at the standard price, and then from that you subtract the actual quantity at the actual price. That gives you your spending variance. Okay? So these next few slides just reiterate that that verbal explanation, right? Notice that in equation 2, that actual quantity, that's the actual amount of either direct labor, direct materials, or variable overhead, okay? The standard quantity, that's the standard quantity that's allowed for the actual output for the period, okay? This is pretty important, recognizing that, because we're going to get into some examples where we may have to calculate what the actual quantity is, And as long as we know that that standard quantity is really the quantity that's allowed for that actual output for the period, okay? And again, we'll work on examples for that. The actual price, that's the amount that's actually paid for the input that's used, whether it's direct material, that labor rate, or that variable overhead rate. Okay. Same thing with the standard price, right? Again, this comes from the planning or the specifications of, hey, here's how much you should pay for the input that you've used. All right. So let's go ahead and let's work through an example of calculating direct material price variance as well as quantity variance for direct material. Okay. So first we have an example, right? The example says that Glacier Peak Outfitters has the following direct material standard for the fiber fill in its mountain parka. So this right here is the standard. Here is the standard quantity, 0.1 kilograms, and here is the standard price, $5 per kilogram. They say that last month 210 kilograms of Fill-A-Fiber were purchased and used. So the actual quantity of that direct material, which is Fill-A-Fiber, is 210 kilograms. Okay. To make, that's the amount we used to make 2,000 parkas. Okay, so that's our output, right? That's how many parkas we actually made. Okay. The materials cost is $1,209. So that's the cost of the direct materials. So we're going to use the same chart that we have. Okay. Now, notice they didn't tell us what the actual price was per kilogram, right? They didn't tell it. They didn't give us that information, right? They said that, hey, the standard's $5, but they didn't tell us what the per unit cost was, okay? But they did give us the total cost of $1,029. So this number right here, the actual price per unit, was calculated by saying, okay, well, if our total was our total cost was $1,029 and we used 210 kilograms, we can divide to figure out what it is per unit. Okay, so this is that equation 1 that we looked at. Here's the equation 2 that we looked at, the actual quantity at the standard price. Well, they told us that the actual quantity used was 210 kilograms, right? They told us that the standard price was $5 per kilogram. So that means based on the actual quantity that we used, looking at the standard price, technically we should have paid $1,050. Okay? We could tell that the actual price that we paid compared with the standard price we should have paid were actually favorable because we paid less than we should have. So the price variance in this case is $21 favorable. Okay, favorable. Now we look at the standard quantity, right? Well, let's go back. They didn't tell us what our standard quantity was, right? Did not tell us. They said it was 0.01 kilograms per parka, but they didn't tell us what the total standard quantity was. And remember, that's why I kind of in our last video flagged this one and said, hey, the standard quantity is the standard allowed for the actual output for the period. Okay, Well, that's no problem because we know what the actual output is for the period. It's 2,000 parkas, right? So if you multiply 0.01 times 2,000, you should get 200, right? Oh, sorry, which is what we got here, 200 kilograms. So that's the standard quantity we should have used, but we actually used 210, okay? However, in this equation 3, we have to multiply that by the standard price, which is $5. So right here, looking at the difference between the quantity used versus what we should have used at the standard price, we see that there's a discrepancy. We actually paid $1,050, but the standard says we should have paid $1,000. So the quantity variance is actually unfavorable by $50. Okay? And again, these next slides, if you had the opportunity to look at them, great. If not, that's okay. I'll just kind of go through them real quick. They already showed how we got this 200 kilograms, right? It's the actual output for the period at the standard quantity that should have been used, okay? And the same thing, how did we get that 490? Well, we divided, right? We know what our total price is. We know what the actual quantity is. We divide those to figure out what the actual price per unit is. Okay? So that is, there's another way to look at it, right? We can look at it in equation form, right? This should look familiar to you. The materials price variance is the actual quantity times the actual price minus the actual quantity at the standard price. Well, again, we can use, or we could factor this out and recognize that it's actual quantity times the difference between actual price and standard price. We see that the difference is 10 cents, right? We actually paid 10 cents less than we should have, or than we were supposed to. So we actually have a favorable variance of $21. Now, I just want to show you one thing. This is a negative number. If you multiply this out, positive times a negative, if I remember correctly, it should be a negative, right? Well, why is it favorable? Well, it's favorable even though it's negative because we're paying less than we should have, okay? So technically this should be a negative 21, but we're not going to put the negative in there. We're just going to say $21 favorable. We do the same thing for the materials quantity variance, okay? Materials quantity variance says you take the actual quantity times the standard price minus the standard quantity times the standard price. Well, we didn't know what that standard quantity was. We had to figure that out, right? We know we made 2,000 parkas. We know that we should have used 0.1 kilogram of that filofiber, per parka. So we see that it should be 210 or 200 kilograms of filofiber, right? So we do the same thing that we did up here, right? We factor. We say, well, our standard price, we're going to pull that out, and we're going to multiply that by the difference between the actual quantity and the standard quantity. And here you see that there's a difference of 10 kilograms times $5. That's $50, but we're unfavorable. Why are we unfavorable? Because we used more than we should have. Okay, so who's responsible for the materials variance? Well, again, it all depends on who's responsible for which component, right? We know that the purchasing manager is responsible for the price variance. We know the quantity variance is the responsibility of the production manager. Okay? So in this case, we're going to use the standard price to compute that quantity variance. So the production manager is not going to be held responsible for the purchasing manager's performance because we do that factoring sort of in our equation here. Because we use the standard price, the production manager is not going to be held responsible for the purchasing manager's performance. Okay, and likewise, we use the to figure out the price variance, right? We use the actual quantity used to figure out the difference in the price. Okay. So it's important to recognize that the material these variances that we're calculating here, especially the materials variance, we need to recognize that it's not controllable by one person or one department, right? Because we saw that the production manager schedules production and the purchasing manager buys it. Well, like we said earlier, if the production manager screws up, so to speak, and orders late, right? Well, the purchasing manager may need to pay a little extra to get express shipping. However, on the other hand, if the production manager, or excuse me, the purchasing manager, to get a better price, may buy lower quality raw materials, right? Well, if that happens, if they buy lower quality materials, the production manager's obviously going to have to probably use more of those materials to make the product. So that would lead to an unfavorable materials quantity variance. So the point is, the production manager and the purchasing manager, they have to work together because they both could affect the other's performance, right? Meaning, are you favorable or unfavorable? Okay. So let's just do a quick kind of check here, okay? And what I want you to do, actually, let's just go through it. Okay, so we have Hansen Incorporated has the following direct material standard to manufacture one Zippy. Don't ask me what a Zippy is, I have no idea. So the standard is that it should take 1.5 pounds per Zippy, and we should pay $4 per pound. Okay, no problem. They tell us that last week 1,700 pounds of materials were purchased and used. Okay, so that's the total materials that we used, and they tell us that we made 1,000 Zippies, and the cost of that was $6,630. We need to figure out how many pounds of material should Hansen have used to make the material. Okay, so right now what we're trying to figure out is, what is that standard quantity? And I'm hoping by now, hopefully, in your mind you're thinking, oh, I wrote that down, I know exactly how to do it, I'm going to go look it up and calculate it out. Well, remember, I'll give you a couple seconds to do that, or pause the video and go do that. When we calculate the standard quantity, it's the amount of material that should have been used, or the standard quantity that we should have, standard quantity of material that should have been used at the actual output, right? So we actually made 1,000 Zippies. Our standards say that we should use 1.5 pounds, right? So our answer should be B. Okay. Now, Hansen's material quantity variance, MQV, for the week was what? So right now, pause the video. Well, before you pause the video, try this on your own and don't look at the slides. Just give it a good try. and then after you try it, unpause the video, come back. Okay, so remember, in order for us to figure out what our materials quantity variance, we need to know, okay, what is the calculation, right? And the calculation says that to figure out what the quantity variance is, we need to hold standard price constant and multiply the difference in the quantity. So we're going to say, okay, standard price times the difference between the actual quantity minus the standard quantity. Okay? Well, guess what? We already know what the actual quantity is. It's 1,700 pounds. We already know what the standard quantity should be, 1,500 pounds. Oh, sorry. So what we need to do next is just basically plug and chug, right? We know that the standard cost, or the standard price rather, should be $4. We multiply that in the difference between the actual quantity we used minus the standard quantity. So the manufacturing quantity variance is actually unfavorable by $800, right? Just by looking at this, we could tell it's automatically right off the bat it's going to be unfavorable. Why? Because the actual quantity is higher than the standard quantity. Okay? We could do the same thing for the materials price variance, right? So how do I calculate the materials price variance? Well, remember, the price variance says we hold actual quantity constant and we multiply that actual quantity by the difference in the price, the standard price and the actual price. Okay, well, we could do that. We could do that very easily. So let's look at it this way. What is the actual quantity? Well, the actual quantity we already calculated was the 17,000 pounds times the difference in the price, right? The standard price we know should be $4. Okay, but what was our standard price? I can't remember what our actual price. I know what it was in total, right? In total, it was 6,630, right? I know that the actual input used was what? Well, again, the actual input that was used was the 1,700. So if we take and divide our 6630 divided by our 1,700, we get $3.90. So the difference there is actually 10 cents. So right off the bat, we know we're favorable, right? We know we're favorable by $170. So our answer is going to be B. Oh, wrong way. There we go. Our answer is B. Okay. So we just walked through how to do this with those equations, right? We could do it this way as well. We could put it in chart form. Whatever way you're comfortable with, whatever way you understand, whichever way makes more sense to you, I'm okay with. If none of these ways make sense to you, text me, please. We'll set up a Big Blue Button session. Thursdays are great for me. Tuesdays work too. The weekends are good. Friday's good. I'd gladly love to discuss this with you if both of these ways are just throwing you for a loop. Not a problem. Okay. So they walk through and basically tell us how we got what the standards were, the standard quantity. Remember, it's the actual output times the standard pounds that we should have used. Oh, where'd I go here? Yeah, okay, and we did the same thing here. The actual quantity of raw materials that we bought was 1,700. Total cost we divided, that's how we got the $3.90. Okay, now we have to compute direct labor rate and efficiency variance and explain their significance. Guess what? If you followed along in the direct materials price and quantity variance made complete sense to you, this next part is going to be a breeze. If direct material price and quantity variance was a little fuzzy, relax, because we're going to do the same exact thing in our next video when we look at direct labor rate and efficiency variance. We're just using different names. Instead of saying price, we're saying rate. Instead of saying quantity, we're saying efficiency. Okay, so tune back in for that video.